Temperatures cooled off a bit in the southeast today, and scattered thunderstorms brought some relief to the parched area. But the National Weather Service says temperatures could top 100 degrees again in a few days. And experts say crop losses caused by the drought may exceed $1.5 billion. Correspondent Tom Bearden updates us now on the situation in Monroe, North Carolina, a small farming community near Charlotte.
It has been a disastrous year for Bryce Birmingham. Normally, the grass in his pasture is almost knee-high. It usually grows faster than his 80 head of cattle can eat it and supplies virtually all of their nutritional needs. But there hasn't been a decent rain all summer, and the grass is almost gone. The hayfield he planted last month should have helped. He was counting on it for winter feed. It's failing too. Birmingham had to start putting out hay this week 4 months earlier than normal. It means he'll have to buy feed that he really can't afford, and it may force him to do what a lot of his neighbors have already done, sell his herd. Birmingham says that would hurt, financially and psychologically.
So I've had cows. Wife and I were talking a couple of days ago. It's been 40 years since I hadn't owned a cow. And it's just part of my life, is having cows around.
It'd be tough to sell them.
It would. It would really touch me to be without cows.
Birmingham has started to look around to see what kind of help is available. He's heard about the much-publicized hay lift from the Midwest, but he's pretty skeptical.
I've seen on the news where they've been bringing feed in down here in South Carolina and giving farmers 50 bales of hay each. Well, 50 bales of hay sounds like a lot, but really when you got a herd of cows about 80 head in it like I've got, 50 bales of hay in 2 days is gone. That's not any hay.
A lot of other farmers are looking for help, too. There was an overflow crowd last night at an emergency feed meeting at the Union County Courthouse. North Carolina's governor has asked Washington to declare this county and 4 dozen others disaster areas. That would make farmers eligible for low-interest loans and other aid programs. But no one is prepared to talk about specifics yet. In other ways, there may be too much help available.
We have 2 other lists. We didn't... one of them is so thick we didn't have a chance to, of course, Xerox all this off. This is a list of hay that people have said they had here in North Carolina. Most of it's down the eastern part of the state.
There seems to be plenty of feed for sale in this immediate region, but 2 local manufacturers have offered to transport hay from the Midwest in trucks that would normally return empty. County agent M.C. Howell is worried that farmers trying to take advantage of those low-cost transportation offers will find themselves in hot water trying to consummate a long-distance grain deal.
It's just not as simple as that guy pulling up and getting that damn stuff popped right in there and, you know, hip down the road with it. There's just a little more to it. It's not that people are trying to be hard to get along with it. There's just a lot of little details that have to be worked out.
Bryce Birmingham has already bought some hay from this man, Eric Hasty. He's in the business of selling hay, and he says all the publicity is having an impact on prices.
If the news media got involved in this thing, we could have got hay down here a lot cheaper than we can get it now. Hay we had priced in Ohio a month ago is from $10 to $25 a ton higher now. And it's
Hasty contends the existing distribution channels can meet the demand, that extraordinary measures are not only unnecessary, but overly expensive. While some worry about how much it'll cost to feed their cattle, others are worried about feeding their children.
We talk cows all night, and now don't you tell me how all these people is farming, they grows corn and stuff, it's going to feed their family, let alone cows.
I would just absolutely have to agree with you, sir. That's a good point. This situation is certainly worse than it's ever been in my lifetime. I've never seen anything like it.
This morning, the cattlemen in Union County are casting about for a feed supply, locally and in distant fields in Kansas, Nebraska, and Illinois. They're still hoping for rain. There's still time to grow some hay and silage. Bryce Birmingham sits on his porch and watches the sky and hopes.
I look at it every day. Just try to say, Lord, send us rain when you feel like we need it. That's all I can say. I got trust in the Lord that he will send rain before he lets us completely go under.
While farmers in the southeast pray for rain, there are people in the Midwest who are complaining about too much water. Correspondent Elizabeth Brackett reports.
In Chicago, 5,000 people feel the waves shake the walls of their high-rise condominiums. In Michigan, homeowners have had to spend thousands moving their homes to dry land. For many in Indiana, it is already too late. Houses are tumbling down cliffs, weakened by erosion and high water. The Great Lakes are on the rise. 3 of the lakes are at the highest levels ever recorded. Damage estimates are in the millions. Homeowners trying to hold back the water are running out of both money and patience.
There's over 4,500 sandbags here that we filled. A lot of darn work. And the lot now, this water, high water, I'm going to have to fill everything in. I've got 114 truckloads of dirt in here already this year. And I know I'm going to need about another 75 truckloads. You can see here that everything's underwater. All this would be underwater if it wasn't for these sandbags and dikes. I got pumps in different places to, there's one right there. I got a pump there to pump the water out.
65-year-old Earl Brown has lived along the St. Clair River, the natural channel between Lake Huron and Lake Erie, for the past 24 years. Brown bought his home in the mid-60s when the water was low. Since that time, says Brown, the water has risen almost 4 feet. Brown has already dipped into the money he has saved for retirement to raise his garage floor. He hopes he will not have to raise his house as well. Brown blames the Army Corps of Engineers and shipping interests for the water lapping at the sandbags in his front yard.
We always have cycles of water at so many years of high water. They always used to say 7-year cycle of water, be high for 7, low for 7.
What happened to those cycles?
Well, the Army Corps of Engineers has taken it away from us. They've kept the water high. They keep it high for the freighters. That's what it's all for, freighters and hydro companies.
Experts who study the lake say they understand the homeowners' frustrations, but they say it is nature, not man, that has caused the high water. Charles Collinson is the chief geologist for the state of Illinois.
It's a result of a climatic change, an increase in rainfall and a decrease in temperature, so that evaporation has been decreased. And this has been going forward since about 1940. And so that water has accumulated in the lakes, and like a bathtub, when it's full, it's a crisis, and that's what's happened now.
Scientists now admit that they may have been wrong when they told shore residents they could expect lake water to rise and fall on a cyclical basis. Although lake levels have gone up and down in the past 20 years, the overall trend is up, about 5 feet up. And recent studies have shown that in the 15th and 16th century, levels were probably even 3 feet higher than they are today. And ominously, those earlier lake levels stayed high for a period of 100 years. As the waters continue to rise, damage costs rise as well. The Army Corps of Engineers estimates that high water has already caused $50 to $100 million worth of damage along the Illinois shoreline alone. Most of these high-rise buildings on the north side of Chicago were built in the 1960s when the water was low. Shelley Lolkin, a high-rise resident for the past 12 years, says some of the foundations of the buildings along this strip have already begun to show damage.
The force of the waves hitting the buildings, they're breaking away chunks off the seawall. They're causing damage to the brick walls behind the building. And the lake is up, which means that the waves which come in about 10 feet higher during a storm are hitting at even a higher length.
When you're at home in your building, can you feel the force of the lake?
Oh, yes. You can feel it in most of the buildings within this 4-block stretch.
The worst damage occurs when storms toss the already high waters. A Lake Erie homeowner filmed this storm last March. Even a $2.3 million seawall proved to be inadequate at holding back the raging water. Last December, another storm raised the waters of the southern end of Lake Michigan 8 feet. Attorney Tom Murphy had a summer home in Beverly Shores, Indiana, before the waves hit.
All this concrete was up and in place with a big patio and stairs down to the beach. And ultimately, on December 2nd, there was a very major storm which sucked the sand out from behind all the rocks and caused the house to collapse.
The problem of high water and erosion was not new to Murphy. In 1982, he watched a house he had been in for 6 years tumble down this steep dune as erosion undermined its foundation. Murphy moved into a smaller guest house set further back from the edge of the dunes. 3 years later, that house too wound up in the lake.
Where would we be standing right here in the old house?
Right at the very back of the screen porch, so it would be even back of the main house, maybe 35 feet from the front door.
In front.
Right.
Undaunted, Murphy bought this house, hoping that the high water of the 80s would recede as it had in the recent past. Like so many others on the lakeshore, he was wrong.
The Army Corps of Engineers spent $190,000 to put in these limestone rocks. The rocks, called a revetment, saved the road from erosion, but the revetment was 200 yards short of saving the Murphy house.
Other solutions have also been tried. In Michigan, the Army Corps of Engineers has spent $1 million in the last year on seawalls, revetments, and cribs to cut down on wave action. But Corps solutions are expensive. In Chicago, the Army Corps estimates that it would cost nearly $8 million to protect property in this 1-mile stretch of city shoreline. And financially strapped state and local governments are expected to kick in 30% of the cost of all Corps projects. There are also aesthetic and environmental criticism leveled against these projects. Environmentalist Lee Bott says building walls between the lake and the shoreline will change the lakes forever.
Wherever they are put in place, they simply move the erosion process downshore so that they may protect one piece of property at the expense of increasing the erosion downshore. Another dilemma is that once that hard surface or that armor on the shoreline is put in place, even if lake levels go down, the beach will not rebuild.
There are some proposals for long-range solutions to lower water levels on the lakes. 2 Canadian rivers now being diverted into the lakes could be turned around. More water could be let out through the locks at the Chicago River or down the St. Lawrence Seaway. But there are big problems with all of the proposals. None of them are very effective. Frank Quinn is the chief hydrologist for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
And has a relatively small effect on the Great Lakes. Perhaps you could let out a little more water at Chicago if it would be amenable to the downstream residents and all the interests that would be affected. This might lower the lake levels another 2 inches over the next 12 years.
That's it?
That's it.
But to lakeshore residents, those inches are important. 10,000 residents around the Great Lakes have formed a citizens group to lobby for lower lake levels. The group is headed by Clifford Sasfee.
Inches of level mean the difference between possible total destruction of the property or possible severe damage, or maybe the difference between severe damage and no damage. The floor that we're seated on today had about an inch of water covering it last spring. So obviously if we were 2 inches less, there wouldn't have been any water.
The long-range goal of Sasfee's group is to lower water levels by blasting a new channel for the St. Lawrence Seaway in Buffalo. That solution might work, but it could take 10 to 20 years to complete. So for homeowners along the lake shore, there is no clear solution. What is clear is that the shorelines of the Great Lakes are changing, and the millions who live along that shore are in for a long and expensive battle.
Finally tonight, the continuing debate over U.S.-South Africa policy. Yesterday, President Reagan announced where he stood, which was firmly against apartheid, but also firmly against economic sanctions against the white minority government of South Africa. Today, Secretary of State Schultz discussed that administration position with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It was a discussion that turned hot at times, particularly between Schultz and Senator Joseph Biden, Democrat of Delaware. Here is a healthy excerpt of the Schultz-Biden dialogue.
And I think it's quite clear that if you're wondering if there is a message being sent, it is being sent. It's being sent diplomatically, it's being sent politically, It's being sent economically, and it's being sent with violence, unfortunately. I think there is some merit to the argument that the message delivered by the marketplace is a more powerful and deeper message than a message that might be delivered by some action that would be taken here.
What disturbs me more than the policy that you call a policy is the rationale for the policy. The rationale for the policy. You set out 4 principles that you adhere to, and then and I will go over them in a moment. Then you say on page 14, we must not become part of South Africa's problem. We must remain part of their solution. We must not aim to impose ourselves, our solutions, our favorites in South Africa. Damn it, we have favorites in South Africa. The favorites in South Africa are the people who are being repressed by that ugly white regime. We have favorites. Our loyalty is not to South Africa, it's to South Africans. And the South Africans are majority black, and they are being excoriated. They tried everything for the last 20 years. They begged, they borrowed, they crawled, and now they're taking up arms. The second thing, progress toward peace requires a timetable. Timetable, elimination of apartheid. What's our timetable? What are we saying to that repugnant regime? Mr. Secretary, maybe it's because I come from the civil rights movement in this country. We sat there and we heard the same kind of argument. The same exact argument.
We have said again and again and again that it's an abhorrent system, and I can be just as emotional as you can about that, and it needs to end.
These people are being crushed. And we're sitting here with the same kind of rhetoric. The same thing we heard. We heard, go slow. We heard, we have to take care of the problem afterwards. We heard, we can't impose...
You are totally misconstruing the testimony that I gave.
Read first.
Furthermore, Senator, let me say that I hate to hear a senator of the United States calling for violence.
I'm not calling for violence.
That's what you're doing.
I hate to hear
exactly what you're doing.
I hate to hear an administration and a Secretary of State refusing to act on a morally abhorrent point. I hate to hear this country. I'm ashamed that this country puts out a policy like this that says nothing. Nothing. It says continue the same. We put no timetable on. We make no specific demand. We don't set it down. I'm ashamed that's our policy. That's what I'm ashamed of. I'm ashamed of the lack of moral backbone to this policy.
Well, I resent that deeply, because there is tremendous moral backbone in that policy on a bipartisan basis, and has been for many, many years.
There is no bipartisan basis for this.
There is, I doubt very much if there is any real disagreement with the objectives set out there, with the steps that have to be taken if there is going to be the kind of change you want. There is no other way but to get those things to happen.
The only way.
Now the question is, what can we do that will get those things to happen? And I think that I outlined the course that is there, and also have tried to point up to you and to the South African government the terrible situation they're creating for themselves.
Obviously, the action has caused violence, or at least has not stopped the violence. There is violence, overwhelming violence in South Africa today. If you want to avoid more, the former Prime Minister of Australia is correct. Let the South African blacks know that we stand with them four square.
We do.
The committee will end its 3 days of South Africa hearings tomorrow. Most expect it to then do what Secretary Schultz and President Reagan do not want it to do, which is to recommend to the full Senate a package of limited sanctions.
Turning now to a last look at today's top stories. The Senate approved the nomination of Daniel Mannion to be a federal judge. Vice President Bush voted to break a 49-49 tie. Federal Reserve Board Chairman Paul Volcker warned Congress about strains on the U.S. economy. And the federal government reported that consumer prices and personal income rose in June. Good night, Jim.
Good night, Charlene. We'll see you tomorrow night. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is provided by AT&T. Whether it's telephones, information systems, network systems, long-distance services, or computers, AT&T. Funding also is provided by this station and other public television stations, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
For a transcript, send $2 to Box 345, New York, New York, 10101.
The MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is a major work in television journalism. The printed transcripts of the NewsHour, available for a fee by mail, are invaluable to serious researchers. In cooperation with the Ben West Public Library, Channel 8, your public television station, has placed its copies of the printed transcripts current with a 1-month delay so the public may have access to them at no cost. Channel 8's copies may be read in the reading reference room of the Ben West Library in downtown Nashville during regular hours, weekdays from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., Saturdays 9 to 5, and Sundays from 2 to 5. The MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, television journalism at its best. The MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour printed transcripts are now available in the reference room of the Ben West Library.